So we talked about this also on Roland Martin Unfiltered as well a little bit, the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. But I've been dealing with that a lot here this week because it's important to understand how that bill impacts the African American community, how it impacts America in general, but also how it impacts the African American community. Um, James Clyburn was on um, he was on Charles Blow's show on the Black News Channel. He was on there, I think it was Thursday, and talking about the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. We're going to deal with that because he breaks down how it would impact the African American community. But then also that was on Wednesday, November 10th. He was on Charles Blow's show, okay, on the Black News Channel. But this past Monday, I don't know if people saw coverage of this. Monday, November 8th, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg was at a White House daily briefing, White House press briefing, and he talked about historic racism when it comes to infrastructure. Okay, he talked about historic racism when it comes to infrastructure, and he dealt with how they're trying to address that historic racism with the infrastructure bill. And he talked about expressways going through the African American community in the U.S. Interstate Highway Acts in 1952 and 56 that drove 41,000 miles of U.S. interstate highway throughout the African American community. But he also talked about in New York, and he dealt with infrastructure in New York and how overpasses in New York were lowered. The height of overpasses were lowered to restrict buses carrying African American children and Puerto Rican children, carrying them to the beach and things like this, so they couldn't pass through. And he talked about Robert Moses. Well, references Robert Moses. Robert Moses was a New York City official who set out to reshape how the city's residents moved and reshape the infrastructure of the city of New York. And it's a deep history here. So we're going to talk some about that also. I talked about this earlier in the week. There's a good piece, one from Joanne Reed's blog, and then also from Rachel Maddow's blog as well. But there is numerous information dealing with a history of racism when it comes to interstate highways coming from the Department of Transportation. Now, Pete Buttigieg got backlash from Republicans like Senator Ted Cruz, line flying Ted Cruz, Cancun Ted Cruz, Geraldo Rivera, Tucker Carlson, and things like this. A lot of idiots on the right who don't want to talk about racism and say things like, "Oh, well, that was back in the 1920s," okay, but they don't want to deal with the legacy of the racism when it comes to transportation and it comes to highways. They don't want to have that conversation. All right, so we'll discuss that. Now, also, Plessy versus Ferguson, U.S. Supreme Court case, 1896. I teach about this in the online class I teach on Saturdays, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1966. Plessy versus Ferguson, Homer Plessy, who was the plaintiff in the case that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court case. It was dealing with transportation. He may get a pardon, okay? He may get a posthumous pardon, all right? So we'll talk about that as well. And it's a deep history behind this. The Louisiana board, so this case comes out of Louisiana. Louisiana board votes to pardon Homer Plessy, plaintiff in Plessy versus Ferguson, U.S. Supreme Court case. And it's 125 years after the U.S. Supreme Court decision that codified the Jim Crow era. And we'll discuss this as well. Your historian Uhura Williams was on Dr. Mark Lamont Hill's show on the Black News Channel, Black News Tonight. He was on the show this past Wednesday. I think it was the 10th. And he talked about the legacy of Plessy versus Ferguson and gave some background history on this Supreme Court case. So we'll talk about that also. All right. And then we'll give you updates on the online courses that I teach as well. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, be sure to email me at AHNshow@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AHNshow@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Kwanzaa's coming up, Dr. King Day, African American History Month. If you want me to do a presentation either in person or virtually, email me now, okay? Because somebody contacted me 2 weeks ago to speak for African American History Month. So I already got my first booking. Email me now, AHNshow@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, so we can start getting that solidified. All right. On the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct your own behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the African History Network show. We deal with current events, history, politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, Kemet, to 22828. To sign up for our email newsletter, text the word Kemet, Kemet, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and you sign up for our email newsletter there as well. All right. We have these new break times. I'm trying to get used to them here. I was on Charlene Mitchell's show on Thursday, right here on 910 AM Superstation, WFDF, and we talked about the McMichael Bryan trial, the trial of the 3 white men who are on trial for killing Ahmaud Arbery and the killing of Ahmaud Arbery. We talked about that and some other things. I'll be on Brenda Hill's show Monday, November 15th. Her show is 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Her show's on before me on Mondays. I'll be on in the 10 p.m. hour. Okay, I'll be on in the 10 p.m. hour. So you can listen to that here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. Okay, so a lot of people have been talking about the comments from defense attorney Kevin Gow, and he's not helping his client at all, but he's trying to disrupt what's taking place. The facts are not on his side. He's trying to disrupt what's taking place in the courtroom. He said, we don't want any more black pastors. We don't want any more black pastors. And this was after Reverend L. Sharpton was sitting with the family of Ahmaud Arbery in the back of the courtroom, not making any disturbance. We'll discuss this on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, stand by, everybody. Stand by. Stand by. All right, back from break in 4 minutes. Stand by. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. Stand by. Stand by, everybody. Back from break in 3 minutes. Stand by. Back from break in 1 minute. Stand by. Stand by, everybody.
Nine ten, the Superstation, Detroit's only African-American talk radio.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 a.m. Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, November 14th, 2021, and we are live. Calling numbers 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600 is the calling number if you have a question or comment. Okay, so we're going to go hit a clip one here in just a second, Jalen. I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday, November 12th, and we discussed a number of topics. One of them was we talked a little bit about day 6 in dealing with the McMichael Bryan trial. Day 6 dealing with the McMichael Bryan trial. Okay, now, once again, this is not the Ahmaud Arbery trial. Okay, Ahmaud Arbery is not on trial. It's Gregory McMichael, Travis McMichael, and William Bryant who are on trial. Okay, this is not the Ahmaud Arbery trial. So we know on Thursday, November 11th, defense attorney Kevin Gow, who has a history of sticking his foot in his mouth, did it once again when he was talking about Reverend Al Sharpton's presence in the courtroom. And he said, if we're going to start a precedent starting yesterday, where we're going to bring high profile members of the African-American community, into the courtroom to sit with the family during the trial in the presence of the jury, I believe that is intimidating, and it's an attempt to pressure, could be consciously or unconsciously, an attempt to pressure or influence the jury. Okay, an attempt to pressure or influence the jury. All right, now, one, what he said was stupid, and a lot of people know that. Two, is very bigoted. But once again, you're dealing with Georgia, and Georgia has the largest Confederate monument in the country, okay, called Stone Mountain. So this is in Georgia. And three, this may be one of the type of stunts that you pull when you know things are not going well for your client and you want to disrupt the testimony that's taking place and disrupt the trial. We talked about this on Roland Martin Unfiltered, and Roland spoke with Candace Kelly, legal analyst Candace Kelly, who you see on the Black News Channel. And sometimes we're co-panelists on Roland Martin Unfiltered, but she is on the Black News Channel a lot, and I don't blame her because she gets paid by the Black News Channel. So I ain't mad at it at all. So we spoke with Candace Kelly. Roland spoke with Candace Kelly on Friday. Let's go to this clip, Jalen.
Well, yesterday, the one attorney for the 3 white men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery said in court, keep these black pastors from sitting in the courtroom. This was yesterday. Watch this.
My understanding while I was cross-examining Investigator Lowry yesterday is that the Right Reverend Al Sharpton managed to find his way into the back of the courtroom. I'm guessing he was somehow there at the invitation of the victim's family in this case. And I have nothing personally against Mr. Sharpton. My concern is that it's one thing for the family to be present. It's another thing to ask for the lawyer to be present. But if we're going to start a precedent starting yesterday, we're going to bring high-profile members of the African-American community into the courtroom to sit with the family during the trial in the presence of the jury. I believe that's intimidating, and it's an attempt to pressure, could be consciously or unconsciously, an attempt to pressure or influence the jury. To my knowledge, Reverend Al Sharpton has no church in Glenn County, never has. Hasn't been here since Lane Brown ran for mayor, to my knowledge. But we have all kinds of people. We have school board members. We have county commissioners. We have all kinds of pastors in this town, over 100. And the idea that we're going to be serially bringing these people in to sit with the victim's family one after another, obviously, there's only so many pastors they can have. And if their pastor's Al Sharpton right now, that's fine. But then that's it. We don't want any more black pastors coming in here or other Jesse Jackson, whoever was in here earlier this week, sitting with the victim's family, trying to influence the jury in this case. And I'm not saying the state is even aware that Mr. Sharpton was in the courtroom. I certainly wasn't aware of it till last night. But I think the court can understand.
We don't want any black pastors in the courtroom. This was that same attorney today.
Your Honor, I've been asked to address some comments the other day. The court hasn't asked me to do.
Whatever you've been asked to do has not been asked by the court.
Very well. I will let the court know that if my statements yesterday were overly broad, I will follow up with a more specific motion on Monday, putting that and those concerns in the proper context. And my apologies to anyone who might have inadvertently been offended.
Well, joining us right now is legal analyst Candace Kelly. Candace, it's amazing how the backtrack starts. Probably because of this, Candace. Go to my iPad, folks. You heard Ben Crumb asking me to come to Brunswick, Georgia next week. Here's why. Pastor Jamal Bryant, Reverend Al Sharpton, others are calling on pastors from all across the country to convene in Brunswick, Georgia, on the courthouse steps next Thursday at 11 a.m. as a show of force. Ben Crump earlier posted that they wanted 100 pastors. I got a feeling it's going to be a hell of a lot more. And so this white attorney, he opened up a can of worms. And if you thought, one pastor, Reverend Sharpton, Reverend Jackson, Reverend Barber sitting in the courtroom was somehow going to impact this here, he just asked for a whole lot more to show up.
Listen, as soon as we began talking, you know that they were starting the carpooling plans and sessions and renting buses as soon as he said it. We knew that this was going to happen, and very well it should, because, listen, when the Constitution says we the people, Roland, we the people, we are the ones who are supposed to be checking the courts and holding public accountability, which is why we are allowed in any courtroom, unless you're dealing with a juvenile or someone that's been raped. You can go to ticket court. You can go to court tomorrow. You can go to the Supreme Court. You can go to this court. There are reserved seats for reporters, the public, and people who want to sit with the family. That's where Reverend Al Sharpton was. He was an invited guest. He needs every right to do so. I don't know what type of motion he's going to be filing on Wednesday, so I get the answer that he wants. You are allowed to go to court. You, I, anybody else. I mean, in this case, as far as, room allows, the court is public for accountability in order to make sure that the justice system actually works, which is in question here. Let's not even go there quite yet, right?
Yeah, Ken is absolutely racist. I mean, because here's the piece. Yesterday, we had Barbara Arnwine on, and she said there have been white pastors, there have been rabbis and others who have been praying with the family. He specifically said, we do not want black pastors in the courtroom.
He was so comfortable, and he was so forthright and so bold. He didn't even realize that what he was saying was racist, which gives you an idea about how he acts inside the courtroom and outside of the courtroom when he doesn't have a whole audience listening. Didn't even realize, didn't think twice, still thinks he has a point in order to file that motion on Monday. So you are correct. This is just racist behavior. We've seen this kind of all along in terms of this man and what he has said. Now he is offering an apology. Apology is not going to go that far. And if he wants to really make an apology, he should be out there 11 o'clock next week, Thursday, and address all of those preachers.
And the thing here is, you're right. Okay, what kind of motion are we talking about? What? First of all, it's public. The judge even said, he said, if everybody's abiding by the rules and no one is causing commotion, I can't tell somebody they can't come into the courtroom. And for him to say, oh, no, Judge, keep these high-profile black preachers out of the courtroom because they might impact the jury. But this is the same attorney, though, who complained saying there were not enough brothers on this jury. He is openly saying we need to appeal to the racist Confederate flag flying white folks in Brunswick in this trial.
The Butlers, the Joe Sixpack, he actually wanted to say that this was a protected class. He was going to go for that. You cannot say that a Joe Sixpack is the same as someone who is African American or someone who's pregnant or has a disability. Those are protected classes on a federal level. There's no way that he would have been able to say that. He's saying things that don't even make sense. He's saying things that I don't even think he actually believes. But listen, Roland, this is all about strategy. He has been complaining about what's going on very peacefully outside of the protest for over a week. We talked about people who were outside peacefully protesting, and he said that this was a distraction. What he is trying to do is distract the court. He is trying to make sure that, because he doesn't have the facts on his side or the law on his side, he's pounding his fists in other areas and making sure that there are distractions otherwise. Because every time that he talks to the attorney, the jurors have to leave. There was one day where the jurors had to leave over 6 times. Well, that's a lot. Think about, listen, this is a narrative. There, you are watching a story as a jury. Imagine watching a story just regularly on Netflix and you have six interruptions. The story doesn't flow well. Those interruptions don't bode well. But that is what he's doing. It is all a part of a strategy in order to interrupt, so that the jury loses its continuum in hearing the narrative that these prosecutors are winning in terms of, who's going to be a winner or a loser. The prosecutor is winning in this case in terms of making sure that justice is gotten for Ahmaud Arbery's family.
Last question for you. Can someone file a complaint with the bar for his behavior? This very specific comment here. Is that sort of the kind of complaint that can be filed?
Okay, we'll continue this on the other side of the break. We're coming up on a break. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. If you have a question or comment, you listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by, everybody. Back from break in 4 minutes. Stand by. Back from break in 4 minutes. How's everybody doing? Stand by. Okay, stand by, everybody. How's everybody doing? We got Fly Girl, got Brenda Hill. Hi, Brenda. I'll be on Brenda's show tomorrow, Monday, November 15th. I'll be on 10 p.m. to 10:45 p.m. because my show is on after hers, and I got to get ready for my show. Back from break in 3 minutes. Okay, when we come back from the break, Reverend Al Sharpton responded to those verbal criticisms and attacks by defense attorney Kevin Gow. Reverend Al Sharpton was on Politics Nation on Friday. I'm going to play an excerpt of that interview so you can hear Reverend Al Sharpton explain things even further and how out of line and bigoted these comments were by defense attorney Kevin Gow. Then we'll talk, we'll deal with a little bit about what happened in the trial on Friday, November 12th. Bureau of Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent testifies defendant accused in Ahmaud Arbery's killing said he had an instinct that Ahmaud Arbery had done something wrong. An instinct, no proof, just an instinct. Back from break in 2 minutes. Then we'll talk about the infrastructure bill, and we'll deal with a history of racism when it comes to infrastructure and highways, and how highways were used to destroy African-American communities, things of this nature. And we'll talk about how the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, how it will benefit the African-American community. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, November 14th, 2021. And we are live. Calling numbers 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the calling number if you have a question or comment. Now, be sure to visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register for the online courses I teach on Saturdays and Sundays. Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. And we deal with, we start in history with the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, and we deal with history leading up to the Civil War, and we deal with from 1865 through 1968. Civil War, Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, Jim Crow era. We deal with Plessy versus Ferguson, which we're going to talk about in our second hour, because Homer Plessy, the plaintiff, could very well get a pardon out of Louisiana. Louisiana board votes to pardon Homer Plessy of Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896 U.S. Supreme Court case, which legalized Jim Crow segregation and reversed a lot of gains that African Americans were making during Reconstruction. And then we see this reversal of gains after Reconstruction ends. We see about 1881, we're going to see that Tennessee is going to be the first state to vote to segregate railroad passenger cars. They do this. Tennessee does this in 1881. Then we see Tennessee is going to be followed by Florida in 1887, Mississippi 1888, Texas 1889, Louisiana 1890. Louisiana is where the case Plessy versus Ferguson originates out of. Okay, Louisiana 1890. We see Alabama, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Georgia in 1891. South Carolina, 1898, North Carolina, 1899, Virginia, 1900, Maryland, 1904, and Oklahoma, 1907. Oklahoma comes into the Union in 1907, becomes a state in the Union in 1907. They're going to quickly institute segregation laws and segregation in public accommodations and transportation. And because of the segregation laws in 1907 in Oklahoma, this is why Bass Reeves, the legendary lawman that you see also depicted in The Harder They Fall, the Netflix Western, the fictionalized Western, African-American Western on Netflix, The Harder They Fall, even though it deals with real life people, real life African-American cowboys, things like this, the storyline is fictionalized. Well, Bass Reeves, the legendary lawman that arrested about 3,000 outlaws, he had to retire because of segregation after Oklahoma becomes a state in the Union. Okay, so we'll talk some about Homer Plessy and Plessy versus Ferguson in the second hour of the show. All right, so right before the break, we were talking about the McMichael Bryan trial, day 6 in the McMichael Bryan trial. And we talked about comments from defense attorney Kevin Gow, who's the defense attorney for William Bryan, comments that he made on the defense attorney Kevin Gow made on Thursday. Okay. And he apologizes on Friday for saying we don't want any more black pastors coming to court sitting with the Arbery family. Now, he mentioned Reverend Jesse Jackson. Okay, well, Reverend Jesse Jackson wasn't there. Actually, who was there was Reverend William Barber III. Okay, Reverend William Barber III was actually came to court, and he didn't know the difference between Reverend William Barber III and Jesse Jackson. I know they're both light-skinned African-American men with wavy hair, but he didn't know the difference between the two. Okay, so he just threw out Reverend Jackson's name. All right, I want to go back to this clip here. This is from Roland Martin Unfiltered, Friday, November 12th, when I was a panelist on Roland Martin Unfiltered, and Roland is speaking with legal analyst Candace Kelly, who you see on the Black News Channel almost every day. Candace is doing a great job there, and sometimes we're co-panelists on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go back to the clip, Jalen.
Question for you: can someone file a complaint with the bar for his behavior? This very specific comment here is that sort of the kind of complaint that can be filed with the Georgia Bar Association?
Well, it can be filed. I mean, listen, there were even people who were on his team that put their heads in their hands. Like, what is this man doing? It can be filed. It interrupted the court. It interrupted the process, and it actually didn't make sense. It was racist on its face. There are people and there are attorneys who are looking at this, who sit in important positions, and they're questioning whether or not this man should actually keep his license. I'm surprised that he wasn't fined by the court in some way, that there wasn't some type of contempt of court, because this just didn't make sense. But on the other hand, you also don't want judges kind of getting involved in the process, because this is a judge that runs a very, very tight and clean court, so to speak. And he just doesn't want to be a part of the fray. I'm surprised he wasn't admonished or chastised, but he just didn't want to go there. But I have a feeling that somebody is watching out there in the Bar Association in Georgia, and they're wondering, what can we do about this man? Because this isn't justice. This is just biased behavior. This is strategy. This is the jury can't do their job.
Well, all right, then. Candace Kelly joining us from South Orange, New Jersey. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
All right, Roland. Good to see you.
Okay. And that's Judge Walmsley, who's presiding over that case out of Brunswick, Georgia. Okay, so that was from Roland Martin Unfiltered. We'll share another segment on tomorrow's show from Roland Martin Unfiltered, and you'll get to hear me, because we dealt with a number of different topics. So Friday morning, I was up early. I think Friday morning. I don't remember what time I went to bed for Thursday night, but because we did our show Thursday. So Friday morning, I was watching Morning Joe on MSNBC, and Reverend Al Sharpton was interviewed to talk about the comments from defense attorney Kevin Gow. Okay, now this was before Kevin Gow apologized. Now he gave a weak apology, because he said if he said something that offended people, things like that. Okay, see, he didn't say he didn't want any more white pastors. He didn't say he didn't want any more Jewish rabbis. He didn't say he didn't want any imams or anything like that. He specifically said he didn't want any more black pastors, especially high profile black pastors. So we're going to go to clip 2, Jalen. Reverend Al Sharpton responded to these remarks on Morning Joe on Friday, November 12th. Let's go to clip 2.
I want to show a clip of when
your name was bandied around in court yesterday, and this day, really, it's crazy, crazy attack against you. And take note, if you haven't yet, Rev, at the people around the attorney, how embarrassed they are by his words and actions.
The idea that we're going to be serially bringing these people in to sit with the victim's family one after another, obviously there's only so many actors they can have. And if their pastor is Al Sharpton right now, that's fine, but then that's it. We don't want any more black pastors coming in here, or other Jesse Jackson, whoever was in here earlier this week, sitting with the victim's family, trying to influence the jury in this case. If a bunch of folks came in here dressed like Colonel Sanders with white masks sitting in the back, I mean, that would be good.
See the person next to him, head in hand, going, "My God, what's wrong with this guy?" I mean, the race is. You talk about taking a center stage here, Rev, and taking center stage even from jury selection, where you have a disproportionate share of white people on the jury when you just look at the makeup of that county, and then the language on 911 tapes, it's all very ominous. Take us into the courtroom yesterday. What happened?
What happened day before yesterday? I went at the invitation of the parents. Since the killing of Ahmaud, I've been very close with the family. National Action Network had supported them. Just 3 weeks ago, I preached in Savannah at a church. Both the mother and father came, and they had a press conference asking me to come. I went to both console them, to hold the press conference and do a prayer vigil, and that's what we do, part of the services. And man, just 2 weeks ago, Monday before last, when we had the 30th anniversary of National Action Network, we had families there that we fought for 20, 30 years ago because we stay in touch. Every holiday I call them. That's what we do. So the mother and father get to designate one person each day, each, that they can bring in the courtroom. And the father brought me as his designee, the mother brought her designee. And I sat on the last row of the courtroom. And the lawyer admitted himself he didn't know till later that I was even there. I'm there to console them. They're in the courtroom looking at three men that killed their son. That's traumatic enough. They are behind the defense table is the family of those that killed their son. And then they're behind them. To sit there every day, can you imagine the trauma and stress this mother and father go through, hearing about the evidence, hearing the evidence about how their son was killed, looking at the killers, and you're going to tell them that a minister that's working with them, that head of the civil rights group that has been working with them, can't come in the courtroom? And then to make it worse, Joe, he makes it blanket. We too many black pastors. We don't want black pastors, not even pastors.
Okay, pause right there. We'll continue this on. Pause right there. We'll continue this on the other side of the break. Just back it up about 30 seconds or a minute. Coming up on the break, 313-778-7600. You listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by. Back from break in 4 or 5 minutes, whatever the hell it is. Stand by. Stand by, everybody. All right, stand by. Back from break in 3 minutes. Back from break in 2 minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. It's Sunday, November 14th, 2021. Calling numbers 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600. So right before the break, we were talking about defense attorney Kevin Gow and his comments in court on Thursday, November 11th. He is defense attorney for William Bryan. In the McMichael Bryan trial in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. He apologized on Friday, November 12th for his "We don't want any more black pastors" comments. And he talked about Reverend Al Sharpton being in court, who was a guest of the father of Ahmaud Arbery. And he was sitting in the back of the court. He wasn't bothering anybody. He didn't do a speech or anything like that. Reverend Al Sharpton was on Friday, November 12th, was on Morning Joe, explaining what was happening and what happened and responding to these idiotic comments from defense attorney Kevin Gow. Let's go back to this clip, Jalen.
Imagine the trauma and stress this mother and father go through, hearing about the evidence, hearing the evidence about how their son was killed, looking at the killers. And you're going to tell them that a minister that's working with them, that head of the civil rights group that has been working with them, can't come in the courtroom. And then to make it worse, Joe, he makes it blanket. Too many black pastors. We don't want black pastors, not even pastors. I mean, how does he know the difference between a regular black and a black pastor unless you have a collar on? And to go into Kentucky Fried Chicken, a stereotype associated with blacks, I mean, it is the most bizarre thing I've ever heard. And to the judge's credit, he says he wasn't going to do it. Imagine the precedent of saying I'm going to involve black pastors. I've seen policemen on trial, whether they were the victim or whether they were accused, and police packed the courtroom. Joe Madison, the radio host, brought that up. Police packed the courtroom. Do you say they're trying to intimidate the jury? But a black minister by himself sitting with a mother and father, I'm intimidating because I'm sitting on the back row? It is absurd on his face.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, he obviously just wanted to bring up your name and, again, hope to play into racial stereotypes with the jury. The overwhelmingly white jury, because you're on the back row. He doesn't even know you're there. And he's saying that. I want to underline something that you said, because often when you go to trials or you go and you're with family at events, people will criticize you and say, oh, why is he always there? Why is he at these places where people have been killed? Or why? Well, I know you. I know you start every day. You get on the phone after you're off this show. You get on the phone. You call 10 people every day, people whose kids are in trouble or people who are in trouble themselves. And as a pastor, you comfort them. You console them. You say, I'm here. By the way, I'm not doing a commercial for you. I know you. We're friends. This is what you do. And I've never known one time when you went to one of these places where you aren't there because the family of a deceased son or daughter is asking you to go there. Can you underline that fact again
I think
for those who would twist your actions?
I think it's very important that we do not go into any cases at all. We be a National Action Network and me personally, that we're not asked to come. Most of these cases, 90%, we never heard of the case until the family calls us. I never heard of Ahmaud Arbery. I never heard of the case of Trayvon Martin 10 years ago till the family came to us. We come and help to bring public light, but we also have a bond. A lot of Trayvon Martin's brother, who lives in New York now, is close with my daughters because we become like family. This is 10 years because they can talk to us about things they don't want to talk to other people about. That's what ministers do. I'm a minister and an activist. My ministry is my activism. I take this very serious because that could be my kid. Ahmaud could have been my son, and I'm not going to in any way not be there for his parents because that could be me sitting in the courtroom about one of my daughters.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jalen. Okay. So that was from Morning Joe. That was an excerpt of the interview from Morning Joe on Friday, November 12th. So defense attorney Kevin Guile then goes and starts talking about Colonel Sanders, right? Okay. So it's like, okay, you got to be like 70 years old because like most people who go to Kentucky Fried Chicken don't talk about Colonel Sanders. Colonel Sanders used to be, or somebody portraying Colonel Sanders used to be in KFC commercials, years ago. But and I think in the last few years they've had somebody that's not the real Colonel Sanders. Colonel Sanders died years ago, but it's like, okay, you reference Colonel Sanders in white gloves. It's it's just crazy. But once again, this is Georgia, okay? Georgia has one of the largest Confederate monuments in the country. Georgia, and the whole case is really strange. The reason why is, now we talked about this here before in the show, and pretty much each day we've been dealing with this story. We've been dealing with the trial. So for instance, the citizens arrest law that the defense is citing, even though none of the three defendants said citizens arrest when they were chasing Ahmaud Arbery for 5 minutes. They didn't say citizens arrest. And when the police arrived on the scene, they didn't tell the police they were trying to effectuate a citizen's arrest. But let's just go with what you made up after the fact, allegedly. The citizens arrest law that they're citing dates back to 1863, when Georgia was part of the Confederacy. So this is a law during slavery. Okay, when Georgia was part of the Confederacy, Georgia has separated from the U.S. to become part of the Confederacy to maintain slavery. They took up arms against the Union, committed treason based upon Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. If we look at this article from fastcompany.com that came out July 2020, that gives background historical information on the citizens arrest law, we know the law was repealed in May 2021 in Georgia, but the law was established in 1863 to allow white people to be able to capture slaves fleeing to join the Union Army during the Civil War. Okay, so they were running away from Georgia plantations, running behind Union lines, and this law was created to target fugitive runaway slaves in 1863. And this is what they chose to claim as their defense, and they chased Ahmaud Arbery down like a runaway slave. Then we about to go to clip 3, Jalen. We're going to clip 3 from NBC Nightly News. Then in court on Thursday, November 11th, right? You have Larry English Jr. testimony that he gave back in September. Larry English Jr. is the homeowner whose house Ahmaud would go into, okay? And we'll play this on the other side of the break. You got to hear this. You ain't gonna believe this, because I'm sitting there day after day looking at this, and I'm like, what year do these people live in? What year did these people live in down in Brunswick, Georgia, in the Glenn County, Georgia area? Listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by. Back from break in 4 minutes. Stand by. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. Stand by. All right. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. Stand by. Calling numbers 313-778-7600. Who still needs to register for the online course I teach on Saturdays from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. This is a 10-week online course. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. Then on Sundays, I teach ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. In that class, we do thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Stand by. Back from break in 1 minute. Back from
910 AM Superstation, a division of Adele Media. The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 910 AM Superstation or Adele Media.
Welcome back to the African History Network show. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It's Sunday, November 14th, 2021. Okay, so right before the break, I was talking about some of the history behind the citizens arrest law in Georgia that 3 defendants are using as the pretext to effectuate a citizen's arrest on Ahmaud Arbery, even though they didn't tell Ahmaud he was under citizen's arrest. They basically created this after the fact because they didn't tell the police who arrived on the scene have testified in court, and they testified that the guys didn't tell them that they were effectuating a citizen's arrest, and they're reading from a transcript of the body camera footage that recorded interactions with Gregory McMichael, Travis McMichael, and William Bryant. But as we were talking about right before the break, this citizen's arrest law dates back to 1863 during the Civil War. And Georgia has seceded from the Union. We know the first state to secede from the Union was South Carolina, December 20th, 1860. Civil War starts April 12th, 1861 with the attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. And this law was established to allow white people to be able to capture runaway slaves fleeing from plantations in Georgia and joining Union troops. Okay, it was targeting fugitive runaway slaves. Read this article here from fastcompany.com, the troubling history of citizens' arrests from slave patrols to Ahmaud Arbery to ICE. This is from July 20th, 2020. Okay, and then we're about to go to clip 3, Jalen. Then in court on Thursday, November 11th, okay, which was day 5 of testimony in the trial. Larry English, who owned the home on Satilla Drive, where that was under construction for over a year, had no doors, no windows, did not have a sign saying no trespassing. He testified, he gave testimony a few months ago, okay? And they played this testimony in court, all right? And Larry English called authorities back on November 17th, 2019, when he saw a white couple entering his property, and then he also called back in October 2019. He made a call to authorities to establish, to report an individual on his property. Here's what happened. Here's how he described that individual in October 2019 when he called the police. Let's go to clip 3, Jalen.
A homeowner's 911 call after seeing someone on his home security camera in the neighborhood where Ahmaud Arbery was killed. The video from 5 months before the fatal encounter. Attorneys for the 3 men accused of murder say it was Arbery, one of at least 4 times he was seen in the house under construction. As the defense tries to convince the jury, Arbery was not an innocent jogger, but rather a suspicious figure the defendants were trying to place under citizen's arrest, and who defendant Travis McMichael already had come face-to-face with near that same house under construction. The jury hearing McMichael's 911 call 12 days before he shot and killed Arbery, he says in self-defense.
When I turned around and saw him and backed up, he reached into his pocket and ran into the house. So I don't know if he's armed or not.
Arbery's family has said he stopped at the construction site because he wanted to learn how to build a home for his parents. Prosecutors showed the jury video of several other people at the location while questioning the owner about whether Arbery ever stole anything. Prosecutors say the defendants had no reason to chase Arbery on the day in question, while asking the police officer to read part of one of the defendants' first interviews.
What does Greg McMichael say on lines 3 through 6?
He was trapped like a rat.
Testimony expected to continue with more police officers quoting their interrogations of the defendants as prosecutors try to use their own words to convict them.
Okay, so Jalen, just cue that back up from the beginning, because I don't think people heard how Larry English Jr. Described the person who he saw on camera. Okay, now read the article from CNN. This is from November 12th, 2021. It was from November 11th, 2021, Thursday, updated Friday, November 12th, 2021. The name of this article here, and they got these ads playing on CNN's page. Homeowner who called 911. Homeowner who called 911. Homeowner who called 911 about people at site in months before Arbery's killing testified he did not ask the McMichaels to secure his property. Okay, I think that's the right. Yeah, that's that article. And so Larry English Jr. Described an African-American person he saw on a security camera as a colored guy. He described him as I'm sitting there watching this stuff, and I'm like, okay, so it can't get worse than, so you get 3 white men chasing Ahmaud down, and at least 2 of them have guns. They chase him down like a runaway slave. They're using a 1863 Civil War era citizens arrest law that was used to target fugitive runaway slaves. While Georgia was part of the Confederacy because they separated from the Union and took up arms to maintain slavery. And then you have, it was also on Thursday that you had Kevin Gow say, we don't stand up in court and say we don't want any more black pastors. Now the jury had been asked to step out for him to make that motion, but Larry English said he installed cameras around the home that he was able to monitor, so that he was able to monitor using an app on his phone. In late October 2019, Larry English made a call to authorities to report an individual on his property whom he described, quote, as a colored guy, got real curly looking hair, end quote, with tattoos, who was just, quote, pondering around, end quote, and asked for a deputy to go to the property. Let's go back to clip 3. I want the people to hear this again. Let's go to clip 3, Jalen.
A homeowner's 911 call after seeing someone on his home security camera in the neighborhood where Ahmaud Arbery was killed. The video from 5 months before the fatal encounter. Attorneys for the 3 men accused of murder say it was Arbery, one of at least 4 times he was seen in the house under construction. As the defense tries to convince the jury, Arbery was not an innocent jogger, but rather a suspicious figure the defendants were trying to place under citizen's arrest, and who defendant Travis McMichael already had come face to face with near that same house under construction. The jury hearing McMichael's 911 call 12 days before he shot and killed Arbery, he says in self-defense.
When I turned around and saw him and backed up, he reached into his pocket and ran into the house. So I don't know if he's armed or not.
Arbery's family has said he stopped at the construction site because he wanted to learn how to build a home for his parents. Prosecutors showed the jury video of several other people at the location while questioning the owner about whether Arbery ever stole anything. Prosecutors say the defendants had no reason to chase Arbery on the day in question, while asking the police officer to read part of one of the defendants' first interviews.
What does Greg McMichael say on lines 3 through 6?
He was trapped like a rat.
Testimony expected to continue with more police officers quoting their interrogations of the defendants as prosecutors try to use their own words to convict them.
All right, stop it. Okay, I was saying stop the clip. I guess you couldn't hear me. Okay, so he described him as a colored guy. And I'm sitting there, Colonel Sanders, black pastors, 1863 Civil War era fugitive slave law, citizens arrest, colored guy. And I'm sitting there trying to figure out, okay, what year is this? Oh. Read this article here from CNN.com. Homeowner who called 911 about people at site in months before Arbery's killing testified he did not ask the McMichaels to secure his property. Okay, that's from CNN. That was updated on November 12th, 2021. All right, now we'll have more coverage of day 7 on Monday's show. All right, I want to switch gears here, and I want to go to the infrastructure bill. Now, we've been talking about this pretty much each week here on the show, and you know we've dealt with segments before that dealt with racism when it comes to highways and infrastructure, Department of Transportation, things like this. NBC News has a huge article that came out back in June. It's called Bisected, I think, what was it? Bulldozed and Bisected. Bulldozed and Bisected, okay? And this is another piece of evidence that deals with the history of racism when it comes to infrastructure. Okay, now idiots like Senator Ted Cruz, who they should have a recall election in Texas to recall Senator Ted Cruz once they get this voter suppression bill straightened out in Texas. But Senator Ted Cruz tweeted, something crazy like, how could a highway be racist or something like that? What did this idiot say? And he was responding to Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, on Monday, November 8th, when Secretary Buttigieg spoke at the White House press briefing, okay, to talk about the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill and a history of racism when it comes to highways and infrastructure, things like this, transportation, okay? So if this article here, bulldozed and bisected highway construction built a legacy of inequality, all right? We're going to go to clip. We're going to go to the, hold on, I think I have to send it to you. We'll go to this in just a second on the other side of the break. Bulldozed and bisected highway construction built a legacy of inequality. Now, this is from June 18th, 2021, NBC News, okay? And gives a lot of background information into this history. But one of the things it talks about is the U.S. Interstate Highway Acts of 1952 and 1956. It also talks about New Orleans, okay, and how the expressways going through New Orleans. But the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 brought 41,000 miles of interstate highways to the country. They go all across the U.S. And there's a recognition now of the harm, and in the last few years, the harm that these expressways have done. Okay, what has changed decades after the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which brought 41,000 miles of interstate highway to the country, is the recognition of the harm that was done to communities left in the shade of these now aging roadways. We have a crumbling infrastructure that's 50, 60 years old, etc. Okay. From 1957 to 1977, the Federal Aid Highway Act program displaced over 475,000 households and 1 million people, according to the U.S. Department of Transportation. Now, as many of these hulking structures reach obsolescence, the federal government and many states and cities are belatedly recognizing the harm they cause and are working with communities to design alternatives that repair the damage. We'll deal with this on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by. Okay. If you all like this type of information, you can support the African History Network. $ the AHN show through Cash App. $ the AHN show through Cash App. Also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. Stand by. Back from break in 4 minutes, hopefully. Okay, stand by. How's everybody doing? Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, and on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Stand by, bathroom break in 2 minutes.
The Superstation, the oldest radio station in town since 1922.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation. I'm Michael Imhotep. All right, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. If you have a question or comment, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. If you have a question or comment. Okay, we'll go to the phone lines here in just a minute. Right, Jalen, I just sent you clips 4 through 7. Okay, we're going to go to clip 4 in just a second here from MSNBC. Okay, so we were talking about this article here that we've dealt with a number of times here before. This is from NBC News. Bulldozed and bisected, highway construction built a legacy of inequality. Okay, and this deals with some of the history of racism when it comes to infrastructure, transportation, things like this. All right. And it goes on to say of more than 50 interstate highways across the country nearing the end of their lifespan, NBC News examined 3 urban neighborhoods that show the range of proposals underway to redress the harms caused by the construction of interstates. Okay, in Syracuse, New York, the 5th Ward, home to many African-American residents, disappeared under the shadows and smog of Interstate 81. Disappeared under the shadows and smog of Interstate 81. New York State has committed $800 million. First phase of the highways removal beginning next year, 2022, to be replaced by a walkable and bikeable community grid. This is an example of how elections have consequences. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. But residents are deeply concerned about displacement, gentrification, and the negative impact on other areas. In New Orleans, bustling Black-owned businesses in the Treem section, closed one by one, as the Claiborne Expressway's gray cement pillars replaced stately white oaks that had lined the avenue. President Joe Biden cited the removal of the expressway as part of his goal of addressing, quote unquote, historic inequities that many in the GOP don't even want to acknowledge either existed, or if they do acknowledge existed, they say, oh, well, that's in the past. It's in the 1920s and 30s. They don't want to deal with the harm that is still causing today and how to address that harm. Okay. Addressing historic inequities within infrastructure. But many longtime residents are so concerned that the removal will lead to gentrification that they don't want it torn down. In Los Angeles, Boyle Heights neighborhood, vast maze of highways took the place of beloved family homes and cut many Latino residents off from their schools, churches, and one another. The pollution from the multiple highway interchanges has severely damaged the air quality in the neighborhood. The pollution from the multiple highway interchanges has severely damaged the air quality in the neighborhood, and residents want sound blocking walls and better air filtration in schools and buildings. Better air filtration in schools and buildings. So all of this deals with policy, deals with politics, it deals with law. All right. So this is and then this article goes on to say, it talks about an interview the Secretary Buttigieg did in April 2021 with thegrio.com. Okay. So read this piece here. Bulldozed and bisected, highway construction built a legacy of inequality. I want to go to, we're going to clip 4. I want to go to this clip here. This is from Velshi, MSNBC, and they're talking about the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill and criticism that Secretary Buttigieg got this week from many Republicans for telling the truth about systemic racism in infrastructure and systemic racism coming from the federal government. Let's go to clip 4, Jalen.
The Troy Mercy is definitely helping me pass.
Okay, started at the 1 hour, 12 minute, 24-second mark. It should queue up there. Oh. Okay, we'll get that queued up.
Broadband access is just to name a few of the elements in the bill. New infrastructure money is being put towards remedying racial inequities in U.S. highway designs. On Monday, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg discussed the racism embedded in American infrastructure and said his agency plans to use about $1 billion to remove or rework highways and roads that have been built to divide communities of color from the white ones. Take a listen.
I'm still surprised that some people were surprised when I pointed to the fact that if a highway was built for the purpose of dividing a white and a black neighborhood, or if an underpass was constructed such that a bus carrying mostly black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or it would have been, in New York was designed too low for it to pass by, that obviously reflects racism that went into those design choices. I don't think we have anything to lose by confronting that simple reality.
Numerous roads and highways in this country have been built right through black and brown communities, displacing millions from their homes over time and helping further shape the economic disparities between white people and people of color. For example, it looks at the Interstate 10 in Houston. Tens of thousands of people in mostly black and Latino neighborhoods were forced from their homes so this highway could be built. And then there's the Cross Bronx Expressway here in New York City. It literally divides the borough in half and has caused asthma rates to spike due to the increased exposure to exhaust and fumes. Who primarily live there? Millions of black and Latino New Yorkers. For more on this, I'm joined by Amy Stallion, architectural and urban designer who works with the Claiborne Avenue Alliance in New Orleans, and Democratic Congressman Richie Torres. He represents New York's 15th Congressional District, located entirely in the Bronx. I want to start with you, Amy. One of the things that I found so compelling with an interview that I recently read, you stated, when I was a kid, I vowed to take it down with my hands. You were speaking about the expressway that basically pitted your family on the other side of New Orleans. Talk a little bit about that impression as a child and why you dedicated your life to the service of making sure we are a more inclusive country through infrastructure.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I don't really remember the highway coming down. I was alive, but I can only imagine that the trauma of seeing my neighborhood destroyed is what made me vow to take it down. I've walked Claiborne Avenue numerous times. I did as a kid. My family shopped there, even at the few stores that were left after the highway was put up. And I just never liked the experience. It's noisy, it's dirty, and I never understood why our neighborhood couldn't be as pretty as other neighborhoods around the city. New Orleans is a beautiful city, and to see this in my neighborhood was really distressing. So I made the promise to myself, and as an adult, came back, and here I am, making every effort to get I-10 over Claiborne Avenue down.
Well, and sometimes we forget how our formative years actually help us identify what is wrong, and then we take to it. And so, Congressman, I want to bring you in because I think that is also one of the reasons why you're so exemplary in the chamber. You quoted earlier this week to Secretary Buttigieg directly, quote, "The Cross Bronx Expressway built by Robert Moss is both literally and metaphorically a structure of racism, with diesel truck traffic polluting the black and brown kids breathe every day." Secretary Pete capped the Cross Bronx. You grew up in the Bronx and you know it well. Talk a little bit about why you tweeted that.
Well, if you lived in mid-20th century New York, Robert Moses had the power to wipe you and your family from the map. He had the power to declare your neighborhood a slum, displacing every family and demolishing every building in sight. The Cross Bronx Expressway, built by Robert Moses, is a structure of racism. It's fought in its way decades of disinvestment and displacement and environmental degradation in the South Bronx. In the South Bronx, there are about 15,000 truck trips to and from the Hunts Point terminal market every single day. Those trucks create massive congestion on the Cross Bronx, and children living near the Cross Bronx or attending school near the Cross Bronx are breathing in pollutants that cause them to have respiratory diseases like asthma. It's no accident that the South Bronx has the highest rates of asthma hospitalization in the country. That is not a coincidence. That is a consequence of the Cross Bronx Expressway and the structural racism that it represents.
Congressman Richie Torres and Amy Spalley, please stay with us. I want to continue the conversation after the break.
Hey, pause it right there. Pause it right there because we're coming up on the break anyway. Pause it right there. Okay, so if we look quickly, we'll pick this up on the other side of the break and go to the phone lines. If we look at this article here, they talked about Robert Moses, and that is Robert Moses, not Robert Moss. Okay. And Washington Post dealt with this as well. The Secretary Buttigieg was referring to a story from Robert Caro's book, The Power Broker, a book that is generally recognized as one of the premier examples of journalism in modern American history. The book centers on Robert Moses, mid-century New York City official who out to reshape how the city's residents moved, mostly successfully. In that book, Robert Caro describes one particular goal of Robert Moses, quote, keeping poor black people from busing to Long Island's Jones Beach, keeping poor black people from busing to Long Island's Jones Beach. So we're understanding how racism is encoded into the infrastructure of America. We'll deal with this on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by. Stand by. Back from break. Okay, back from break in 4 minutes. Stand by. Back from break in 2 minutes. Stand by. Welcome back to the African History Network show. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. Okay, let's go back to right before the break. Was sharing this clip from Velshi, Ali Velshi show on MSNBC. This is from Saturday, November 13th. One of the things they talked about was the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill and a history of racism encoded into the infrastructure of America, the highways, things like this. Okay, let's go back to that clip, Jalen.
Welcome back. Let's continue this conversation about racism and infrastructure. I'm joined once again by Democratic Congressman Richie Torres of New York and Amy Stelly, an architectural and urban designer. Congressman, I want to talk a little bit first of something that we're seeing coming out of the Republican Party. Some of your Republican colleagues say that infrastructure and racism don't go together, that this is something that is, once again, brought in by the Democrats. Can you break that down for me?
Well, infrastructure can be racist, either in intent or fact or both, because there are human beings behind infrastructure. The racism of Robert Moses is a matter of historical fact, documented by Robert Caro in The Power Broker. But what concerns me about highways like the West Bronx is the racially disparate impact it has on communities of color. The people of color have a greater likelihood of living not only near highways, but incinerators, waste transfer stations, the uses of land that are known to impose the greatest environmental and public health burden. The difference in life expectancy between the South Bronx and the Upper East Side is as much as a decade, and that has more to do with the environment than it does with individuals.
Amy, I want to actually read an excerpt of your op-ed that you wrote for the Washington Post. And quote, I do not understand why we can't look at these infrastructure relics the way we look at monuments to white supremacy, such as statues of Confederate heroes and obelisks emphasizing the lost cause. The statues are hurtful reminders of the times when Black people and Native Americans were seen as commodities or nuances in need of removal. Is the fact that the Biden administration is acknowledging this racism today, does that give you hope that we're going to, once again, move away from the sins of the past and into a brighter future?
Yeah. Actually, it does give me a lot of hope. But what we all have to do is decide that we're going to row in the same direction together. So it's one thing for the president and the current administration to express this intent. It's another thing for the cities and the states to get on board. And, for people who don't live in these kinds of conditions, to support those of us who do. It's going to take all of us to conquer this problem.
Congressman, there is a specific earmark of $1 billion to address exactly this issue of tearing down some of these expressways, trying to revitalize and unify communities in the infrastructure bill. Is that enough money?
$1 billion is far from enough, but the larger share of infrastructure funding could potentially go toward racial equity initiatives in infrastructure. For me, the fundamental difference between FDR's New Deal and Joe Biden's Build Back Better is the emphasis on racial equity. And there's no greater expression of racial equity than reconnecting neighborhoods that have been divided for far too long by racist highways. And we should invest more resources toward that end.
Amy, when the infrastructure bill first came out to that point, you were a little disappointed in because perhaps there was not enough. Can you explain how your stance has changed and why it changed?
Yeah, well, I've had to look at this differently because we have what we have. So I want to take the approach that this will be incremental development for New Orleans. We will take the monies that we have and do things like update our traffic study, excuse me, and work to ensure proper community engagement around this so that we can get it down and we can be on the same page as a community. So there are little things that we can do to get to the bigger goal, which is actually to remove and reimagine Claiborne Avenue as a beautiful boulevard. So I've had to change my stance because you have to remain positive and we have to work with what we have. But to the Congressman's point, $1 billion is not nearly enough to do all of the work that we have to do across this country to bring up and lift up people who have been affected and impacted by racist infrastructure. And it is there. It's not only there in highways, it's there in things like railroads, where railroads are used to divide communities. So we've got a lot of work to do in America to actually make things right. And I think once we all get on the same page, we can do this. I'm confident that we can do it.
And I did think that it was striking for a sitting secretary to actually acknowledge the racism that sometimes is very true, but most Americans don't realize when it comes to something as remote as infrastructure and how it was intentional, Congressman. Can you talk a little bit about how this is going to perhaps make all the difference in the Bronx?
It has the potential to be transformative. Nothing would do more to improve the public health of the South Bronx, the poorest congressional district in America, and capping the Cross Bronx Expressway, which would mean preventing the polluting of our air and the poisoning of our children. If the South Bronx were wealthier and whiter, there would be no Cross Bronx Expressway unleashing massive amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution, poisoning children. We would never allow wealthier white children to live in those conditions. People of color deserve better, and clean air should be a right, not a privilege.
Well said, Congressman Richard Torres and Amy Stelly. Thank you for your work and tenacity. Appreciate you having both as a guest today.
Okay, pause it right there, Jalen. Okay, all right, pause it right there. Stop the clip. Thank you. All right, that was Maria Teresa Kumar sitting in for Ali Velshi. If you listen and said, well, that doesn't sound like Ali Velshi. That's Maria Teresa Kumar was sitting in for Ali Velshi on Ali Velshi, Ali Velshi on Saturday, November 13th, 2021. That's from MSNBC.com. At the time of putting together this segment for the show, that is from MSNBC's podcast, because they have not uploaded the video yet. So I had to go into their audio podcast and retrieve that audio and go throughout the entire show and find where that segment was out of a 2-hour show. But anyway, we're coming up on a break here. I'm going to come back to this article here. Let's go to the phone lines quickly. Let's go to line 1. Let's go to Wadsworth, line 1. Thanks for holding, Wadsworth. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Hey, Michael, I do have a comment real quick.
All right.
I actually have two comments. The one thing, because me and my mom were talking last night. We're talking since about 4 a.m. and we're talking about how it's interesting when we got rid of the name when they removed Copa Hall and name when they got rid of Copa Hall name out of that building, and they replaced it with another name. We have
TCF Center.
Another institution.
Talking about the TCF Center that's there now.
We're affiliated for a community college. We're affiliated for a hospital, and we're a full growth company, which we know here for folks who one of the biggest racists, and he didn't do nothing. He hated black people, and I want to get into all this to see if the black people should stand up and should we get that name? Should we get the hospital changed?
Should we change which name? Should we change which name? Should we change which name?
Huh? I can hear you.
You said, should black people change which name? Which name or which building are you talking about? You talked about Cobo Hall is not a TCF center. Okay, which name are you talking about changing?
I should change Henry Ford Hospital.
Henry Ford Hospital?
Henry Ford Community College.
Okay. All right.
Henry Ford Community College, Henry Ford Hospital.
It's up to the people in charge of the hospital. It's up to the people in charge of the hospital if they want to change it from Henry Ford Hospital. You have to look and see who's in control of Henry Ford Hospital, who's in control of Henry Ford College, and see if they want to change that name. Okay. What's your next point? Because we're running out of time. We're coming up on our last break.
Okay, my next point is my next point is this. My next point is that I want to get your opinion on it. What do you say about what would it take for us as a black community,
right,
for us to get things done for ourselves, instead of have us be sit back in the sidelines. What would it take for us to that we can say that we can be upfront, that we can achieve our goals, and not be like a follower.
Okay. All right. All right. What does it take? First, it takes a plan. Secondly, it takes execution of the plan, understanding politics, how to get laws passed. It understands leveraging our economics to enforce our politics. Okay. It understands a number of different things take place. Some people will start at different points. Some people will start running for school board positions. Other people will start with economic empowerment, starting businesses. Other people will start with getting involved in politics. They may become part of the charter commission. They may run for elected office when it comes to city council. So you can start where you are. You don't have to wait until sometime in the future. You can start where you are and unite with like-minded people to get things accomplished. Okay. All right. Thanks for your call, Wadsworth. Call back tomorrow night. We're coming up on our last break. You listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by. Stand by. Back from break in 4 minutes, hopefully. I don't know how many breaks they have. You know you're dealing with a troll when they got the first and last name, and they're dealing with talking points that they got from other people on social media and don't understand history. So you talk about the Republican Party, but you don't talk about the domestic terrorist insurrectionist wing of the party. That's why you just got blocked. That's how you know you're dealing with a dumbass. Stand by. Back from break in 4 minutes. What the hell is this? Stand by. Back from break in 2 minutes, hopefully. Let me see. We're going to squeeze in this last... we'll squeeze in this last clip. We'll go to Plessy versus Ferguson. Okay, we're gonna deal with Plessy versus Ferguson. We'll talk about this a little bit. Last clip. Back from break in 1 minute. Welcome back to the African History Network show. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, November 14th, 2021. Okay, we're going to go to Jalen. We're going to go to the last clip dealing with Homer Plessy, recommended for pardon from the Black News Channel. That is, I think that's clip number 7. We're going to go to that here in just a second. Okay. All right. So the interview with Representative James Clyburn on Prime with Charles Blow, we played that a couple of days ago on the show. Okay. And that's dealing with the infrastructure bill. It's a very interesting interview, but we don't have time for it again tonight. So we'll play that on our Monday show. You know, we're here Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight. Yeah, clip number 7, Jalen. We're here Monday through Friday. I'm not sorry, not clip number 7. It is clip number 8. It'll be clip number 8. Did I send that to you? Doing Plessy versus Ferguson. Take a look here. We're going to go to that. We don't have time. Okay, we don't have time for the James Clyburn clip. Let me send this to you right quick. Everybody read this article here from Yahoo News. Buttigieg responds to Ted Cruz on racism and highway design, because Ted Cruz picked a fight this week with Big Bird, okay, over vaccinations. and then Ted Cruz picked a fight with Secretary Buttigieg for telling the truth about racism, historic racism in infrastructure. All right. So, you know, it's not bad enough that Ted Cruz defends insurrectionists, but he has to also pick a fight with imaginary characters, puppets from Sesame Street. And then also he wants to downplay the severity of racism when it comes to infrastructure. Okay, I just sent it to you, Jalen. We'll go to that clip. Quickly here, if we look at this excerpt from this article, it says the tendency to build highways in neighborhoods with lower incomes or higher proportions of people of color, sometimes acting as de facto racial boundaries, is well established, and it is one reason that pollution and illnesses such as asthma are more prevalent in those areas. All right. And then it has the clip in here. Okay. Some conservative pundits and politicians, including former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who's a Republican, reacted with incredulity to Secretary Buttigieg's comments. Mike Huckabee, whose daughter is Sarah Huckabee Sanders, one of the biggest liars in the Trump administration. He should be very proud of his daughter. Quote, "Is this guy serious?" Huckabee said. This is what happens when ignorance of facts joins with phony enthusiasm. No, this is what happens when you don't want to call out white supremacy and racism and be honest, Governor Huckabee. But looking at your daughter, I see why you don't want to be honest. Then you had Senator Ted Cruz, lion flying Ted Cruz, between picking fights with Big Bird. Ted Cruz tweeted, "The roads are racist. We must get rid of roads. The roads are racist." No, the racists are racist, Ted Cruz. The roads are racist. We must get rid of roads. Okay. This was in response to Joe Concha. His tweet, April Ryan to Pete Buttigieg, quote, "Secretary Mayor Pete, Labs, can you give us the construct on how you would deconstruct the racism that was built into the roadways," end quote. So you have a lot of people, a lot of Republicans who either want to say, oh, well, that was in the 1920s. That was a long time ago. That was in the 1920s, like with Robert Moses and things like this in New York. They don't want to deal with the harm that that these infrastructures are causing right now, the pollution that comes along with them. And they don't want to really talk about how do we deal with this, because they don't want to acknowledge that the problem exists in the first place. So read this article here. We'll talk about some more of this week. Okay. Now on Dr. Mark Lamont Hill's show, okay, they talked about the Plessy versus Ferguson, okay, 1896 U.S. Supreme Court case. And the Louisiana board that is looking to give a pardon, a posthumous pardon to Homer Plessy, who was the plaintiff in this 1896 U.S. Supreme Court case. Let's go to clip number 8, Jalen.
Welcome back to Black News Tonight. Louisiana State Board of Pardons earlier today unanimously decided to clear Homer Plessy's record of a 130-year-old conviction. His name might not immediately ring a bell until, of course, one mentions the Supreme Court case of Plessy versus Ferguson. 6 decades before Rosa Parks was arrested in Alabama, Homer Plessy had already violated the Separate Car Act by taking a seat on a white-only train car in New Orleans. He was later found guilty and fined $25. That's a lot for back then. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, which then upheld the infamous separate but equal ruling. This decision solidified the Jim Crow era segregationist policies in the South until they were struck down by the 1954 decision of Brown versus the Board of Education. Joining me now to discuss is Uhuru Williams. He's a professor of history and the founding director of Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas. Dr. Williams, welcome to the show. Help us understand what the Plessy versus Ferguson decision is. Lots of people have heard that phrase, Plessy versus Ferguson. People know the year 1896, but they don't necessarily fully understand what it means.
It was the decision really that established the doctrine of separate but equal. And this was the idea that in the United States, you could have facilities that were separated by race as long as supposedly there were equal accommodations. And that's why that decision is so important. Louisiana had passed the Separate Car Act in 1890, which required separation of the races on public carriers. Homer Plessy and a committee of mixed race and African-American citizens tried to test the constitutionality of that act, and that's what led to Plessy versus Ferguson. The reason that's so important is that before that, there was a lot of fluidity in race relations. You had some communities where African-Americans could use the same facilities. Post-Plessy, you see every state, essentially in the South, in the former cradle of the Confederacy, and even outside the Confederacy, begin to adopt laws that prohibited integration or mixing of the races. Baltimore, Maryland applies that to cities in 1910. I mean, you see it in all aspects of American society and culture, and that's why that decision is so important. It really establishes the legal precedent.
Pause it right there. Okay. Those watching on our Facebook fan page, pause it right there, Jalen. Those watching on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, and our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, keep watching. We're going to keep going for a few more minutes and finish this clip. Read this article from the New York Times. Homer Plessy's arrest in 1892 led to a landmark ruling. Now he may get justice. We'll talk about this some more on Monday's show. Be sure to visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register for the classes I teach on Saturdays and Sundays. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. And Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. As soon as you register, you can watch the classes we did this weekend. We do the sessions live. They're all recorded. You can go back and watch them anytime. Remember, right now is correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace. Stand by. Okay, stand by, everybody. Let me disconnect this call. Stand by. Let me cue this clip up here. We'll go back to this. Then we have to get out of here. What's everybody doing? They're killing me. They're doing breaks every 15 minutes now. It's killing me. It's too many breaks for talk radio. Stand by. Let me cue up this last clip here. So Uhuru Williams, he's in some videos from history.com, okay? Because I play some of his videos in my class. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. Let's go back to this clip.
Ferguson decision is lots of people have heard that phrase, Plessy versus Ferguson. People know the year 1896, but they don't necessarily fully understand what it means.
It was the decision really that established the doctrine of separate but equal. And this was the idea that in the United States, you could have facilities that were separated by race as long as supposedly there were equal accommodations. And that's why that decision is so important. Louisiana had passed the Separate Car Act in 1890, which required separation of the races on public carriers. Homer Plessy and a committee of mixed race and African-American citizens tried to test the constitutionality of that act, and that's what led to Plessy versus Ferguson. The reason that's so important is that before that, there was a lot of fluidity in race relations. You had some communities where African-Americans could use the same facilities. Post Plessy, you see every state essentially in the South, in the former cradle of the Confederacy and even outside the Confederacy, begin to adopt laws that prohibited integration or mixing of the races. Baltimore, Maryland applies that to cities in 1910. And you see it in all aspects of American society and culture. And that's why that decision is so important. It really establishes the legal precedent for segregation in America.
Mm-hmm. Talk to us about who Homer Plessy was. You know, for a lot of people, Plessy versus Ferguson, it's like Brown versus the Board of Education. We know the name. We know the name of the court case, but we don't necessarily understand who the person was. Who was Homer Plessy? Most people don't know about pre-civil rights era activists who paved the way for many of the decisions that we would see with Rosa Parks, that we would see with Martin King, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a great story in that regard because it exposes people to these ordinary individuals who otherwise have ambiguous lives but wind up in these court cases, and we're exposed to them in that way. I was very excited today when I heard people talking about Claudette Colvin, people talking about Mary Miles, who sued the Philadelphia and Westchester Railroad in 1867, Homer Plessy from 1896, of course, Rosa Parks, whom everyone knows. But these were ordinary, average African Americans. Homer Plessy was a shoemaker, was involved in civil rights, had been someone who was upset by the Separate Car Act, wanted to do something to challenge that inequality in his community. And when the opportunity presented itself, because he, for all intents and purposes, presented as white, he agreed to be the test case for that particular challenge. And so we celebrate him today, too. This is a victory for acknowledging that history and acknowledging the role. I think this is an important lesson for young people that ordinary activists, ordinary people play in helping to make history. People don't wake up and say, I'm going to make history today. They just put themselves in positions where they can challenge inequality, and sometimes history catches up.
So that context of this ordinary person who engages in a battle, an act of resistance, both in the moment and also through the courts long term, he's doing this in the middle of New Orleans. New Orleans was a multiracial city. The Separate Car Act had an extraordinary impact on the culture. It had an extraordinary impact on daily life in an urban city like New Orleans. What did it mean for him to do what he did?
It was a huge act of defiance, Mark. And in fact, this is what's so interesting about New Orleans is the site of this case. Because it is a city where there is so much intermixture of the races, where you had that French influence, Creole influence, and no prohibition, at least early on, in terms of what they called miscegenation and the mixing of the races. The idea was that if you were going to challenge something like the Separate Car Act, that was the state to do it in, because it was very difficult to tell where the color line actually began and ended. The argument was that for all intents and purposes, if Homer Plessy had not told the conductor on the train that day that, in fact, he was African-American, there's no way that the conductor would have known. And that in and of itself was their attempt, this Committee of Concerned Citizens' attempt to illustrate the inanity of having a law based on the color of one's skin that would determine where they sat in a public carrier, what their citizenship rights would be in relation to their color. So, in that sense, this was a huge case in New Orleans, huge case because it really was going to define the color line as we know it. today we think about, and we talk about, particularly in the African American community, a host of products that people use to straighten their hair, to lighten their skin. That's also a legacy of Plessy versus Ferguson. When the color line is determined by color, features, and hair, there's property in whiteness and being able to present white. And so you see in the aftermath of Plessy versus Ferguson, people trying to achieve that look so they could have access to literally first-class citizenship.
Let me back it up here for a minute, because see, he's connecting whiteness with Plessy versus Ferguson 1896 and characteristics of whiteness and having white supremacy and racism imposed upon us, then trying to adopt characteristics of white supremacy or characteristics of whiteness to gain access. So he talks about straightening hair, lightening skin, trying to adopt physical attributes of whiteness to then gain access in this society. I'm going to go back to that, but then also it's important to note when you study Homer Plessy was like 7/8 white. Okay, and if you look at Homer Plessy, I'm gonna pull up this picture here of him. As he said, see, Homer Plessy was from Louisiana. As he said, if Homer Plessy had not told the conductor, his racial makeup, ethnicity, the conductor wouldn't know. He could have passed. This is Homer Plessy. He could have passed. All right, I want to go back to this clip.
There's property in whiteness and being able to present white. And so you see in the aftermath of Plessy versus Ferguson, people trying to achieve that look so they could have access to literally first-class citizenship. That's also kind of the hidden legacy of Plessy as well.
So there are two major 14th Amendment decisions that we can think about. The first one is Plessy versus Ferguson. The second one is Brown versus the Board of Education. One is saying that separate is equal. The other is saying that separate is inherently unequal, right? So we've seen the kind of progression and shift based on these court cases. Are there other rulings that we should be thinking about historically? Are there other things that we might not be thinking about are as big a deal as they are? Because my audience right now is like, oh, okay, Plessy, now I get it. Now I get how this affects us sitting at a lunch counter. Now I get what our ancestors were fighting against. What else are rulings that are in a similar vein?
That's a great question, Mark. I think a half a dozen that immediately present themselves or come to mind for me. The Scottsboro cases, which dealt with African-American representation on jury trials. So criminal justice cases that in our history are very important. Neal versus Delaware, another case very similar to the Scottsboro cases. When we think about the Smith versus Allwhite, the all-white primary in the South, very important cases. So I would say, for people who are interested in this topic, a book like Richard Kluger's Simple Justice, which documents the Plessy case, but looks at these other precedents in other areas, what I like to call the 6 degrees of segregation. Wherever you saw barriers to absolute equality before the law for African Americans in housing and education and access to places of public accommodation and voting rights and Jim Crow justice, you're going to have parallel cases that map to those denials. In housing, for example, we think about cases like Heard versus Hodge and Shelley versus Kramer, which dealt with restrictive covenants, which barred African Americans from owning homes in neighborhoods which were occupied by whites. And these were private agreements, which until the 1940s were judicially enforceable. It's not until Heard versus Hodge and Shelley versus Kramer that they become judicially unenforceable. But the reality is that segregationists, white supremacists found a way around that. And we still are dealing with the legacy of redlining and restrictive covenants even today. But this is an important aspect of our history. I always say to young people, we should memorize the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Really, that is for African Americans, our Declaration of Independence. And then secondly, we should understand the nuance and context of these cases because they matter tremendously in our contemporary moment.
I like that. The 14th Amendment is our Declaration of Independence. That's profound and very, very true. Yoru, as always, you are brilliant. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for joining me on Black News Tonight.
Okay, so that is from Friday, November 12th, 2021. Homer Plessy recommended for pardon for 130-year conviction. That's from Black News Tonight. Dr. Mark Lamont Hill speaking with Professor Historian Yahura Williams. If we look quickly here at this article from the Washington Post, Louisiana board votes to pardon Homer Plessy of Plessy versus Ferguson. This is from Friday, November 12, 2021. In this picture here, you see this African-American man and white woman, Keith Plessy, 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 Keith Plessy, and Phoebe Ferguson, descendants of the principals in the Plessy Ferguson court case in front of a historical marker in New Orleans on June 7th, 2011. Very quickly here, in the annals of the Supreme Court, the Plessy versus Ferguson U.S. Supreme Court case has little competition for the title of worst decision in history. Little competition for the title of worst decision in history. Now, 125 years after the shameful decision that codified the Jim Crow era separate but equal fiction, the namesake of the famous case, Homer Plessy, may be pardoned. The Louisiana Board of Pardons unanimously approved a pardon on Friday, November 12th, according to the Associated Press, sending it to Governor John Bel Edwards, who's a Democrat, Governor John Bel Edwards, for final approval. Now, Governor Edwards' press office said the governor is traveling, quote, but looks forward to receiving and reviewing the recommendation of the board upon his return, end quote. When Keith Plessy, a descendant of Homer Plessy, heard the news, he felt like his feet, quote, were not touching the ground, end quote. He and his friend Phoebe Ferguson, a descendant of the judge in the case, hopped in the car and were driving across New Orleans to the house of another friend, Homer Plessy biographer Keith Weldon Medley, to share the news when they spoke with the Washington Post. Quote, not only is this 125 years of long time coming, Keith Plessy said, he said, but the way things have happened at such a rapid pace just lets you know that Plessy and the civil rights group he was working with were right, end quote. Okay. Now, he credited New Orleans District Attorney Jason Williams, who is African-American, with initiating the pardon effort. Now, the New Orleans in which Homer Plessy was raised was a much freer place than the city he encountered as an adult, according to Medley in his book, We as Freemen, Plessy versus Ferguson. Born in 1862, Homer Plessy grew up during Reconstruction, okay? So he grew up during the Civil War. He grew up, he was born during the Civil War, 1862. He grew up during Reconstruction, which is 1865 to 1877. And when federal troops occupied the city of New Orleans and enforced equal rights. So this is during the period of time that he grows up. African-American residents could vote, run for office, sit anywhere on a streetcar, and for a short period of time attend integrated schools. But Reconstruction ended in 1877 and things changed. And things were being rolled back toward the end of Reconstruction also in various states. But Reconstruction ends in 1877 with the Compromise of 1877. And segregation laws began popping up all over the South, including the law separating races on train cars. Okay. Now we know that is going to, in Tennessee, the segregation on the train cars is going to start in Tennessee in 1881. Tennessee state legislature votes to segregate railroad passenger cars in 1881, followed by Florida in 1887, Mississippi 1888, Texas 1889, Louisiana 1890, Alabama, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Georgia 1891, South Carolina 1898, North Carolina 1899, Virginia 1900, Maryland 1904, and Oklahoma 1907. Okay, so we're going to see this reversal in rights of African Americans. We'll see this reversal before 1896 largely. And then the U.S. Supreme Court is going to rule in 1896 that separate but equal does not violate the U.S. Constitution. So segregation laws began popping up all over the South, including the law separating races on train cars. By 1892, Homer Plessy was a shoemaker. He was married and a member of several education reform and civil rights groups. That's when leaders of one of the groups, let me scroll down here. That's when leaders of one of those groups, the Citizens Committee, picked Homer Plessy for an important job. Quote, he did not have the committee leaders' stellar political histories, literary prowess, business acumen, or law degrees, end quote, Medley wrote. Indeed, his one attribute was being white enough to gain access to the train and black enough to be arrested for doing so. Okay. His one attribute was being white enough to gain access to the train and being black enough to be arrested for doing so, end quote. Now, there are no known photographs of Homer Plessy, but contemporaries described him as appearing to be white. Okay. On June 7th, 1872, the 30-year-old purchased a first-class train ticket on the 4:15 p.m. train from New Orleans to nearby Covington, Louisiana. Then he boarded the first-class car with its mahogany interior, brass lamps, and plush seats. According to one account in a White Run newspaper, when the train pulled out of the station, the conductor asked to see Homer Plessy's ticket. And after a moment inquired, quote, "Are you a colored man?" end quote. Homer Plessy replied, "Yes." Quote, "Then you will have to retire to the colored car," end quote, the conductor said. Another version by the African-American newspaper, the New Orleans Crusader, and recounted in Stephen Luxemburg's book, Separate, the Story of Plessy versus Ferguson and America's Journey from Slavery to Segregation. This account has the conductor asking, quote, "Are you a white man?" To which Homer Plessy responded, "No." Now, Homer Plessy told him he was an American citizen. He had paid for his ticket and he intended to enjoy what he had paid for all the way to Covington, according to Medley. The train stopped. The conductor flagged down a detective who had been hired by the Citizens Committee to be there, and Homer Plessy was arrested. Within hours, the Citizens Committee bailed him out and released a statement to the media. Quote, the next day, the headline in the New Orleans Daily Crescent read, "In the wrong car, a snuff-colored descendant of Ham kicks against the Jim Crow law." In the wrong car, a snuff-colored descendant of Ham kicks against the Jim Crow law and takes the jail end of it rather than comply with its distinctive provisions. That's a long headline. So the judge who got the case, Judge John Howard Ferguson, delayed the trial on the constitutionality of the state law Homer Plessy was charged with violating. Homer Plessy's attorney appealed, and the case slowly made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Nearly 4 years later, on May 18th, 1896, the court issued its 7-1 ruling against Homer Plessy. 7-1 ruling against Homer Plessy. One justice did not vote because he had left town for a family emergency. So it was a 7-1 court ruling. And though the justice who wrote the opinion, Justice Henry Billings Brown, never actually wrote the words, quote, separate but equal, the decision helped establish the infamous precedent. The decision helped to establish the infamous precedent. Quote, we considered the underlying fallacy of the plaintiff's argument to consist in the assumption that the enforced separation of the two races stamps the colored race with a badge of inferiority, if this be so, it is not by reason of anything found in the act, but solely because the colored race chooses to put that construction upon it. Okay, so he's more like saying it's a figment of your imagination. Okay, if this be so, meaning if African Americans are inferior, is not by reason of anything found in the act, is not because of law, is because you just choose to be inferior. Okay, it wasn't because of 246 years of slavery. It's not because of any law. It's not because you're being locked out. You have laws locking you out of largely locking you out of large labor unions and things like this. It's not because of that. It's not because of segregation laws that have crept up in Tennessee and Florida and in other states. Is not because this is 1896. This is after 1890, the Mississippi State Constitution, the Mississippi State Convention of 1890 that institutes poll taxes and literacy tests to suppress the African American vote. This is after 1895 when South Carolina did the same thing. Okay, so it's not because of that stuff there. Okay, it's not because of the end of Reconstruction and the removal of the Union troops from the South and the reversing of African American rights. No, it's just all in your mind. It's just your imagination. If this be so, it's not by reason of anything found in the act, but solely because the colored race chooses to put that construction upon it, end quote. Justice Brown wrote, quote, the argument also assumes that social prejudices may be overcome by legislation, and that equal rights cannot be secured to the Negro except by an enforced commingling of the two races. We cannot accept this proposition. Okay, so all white primaries are okay. You know, things like this, obstacles to the 15th Amendment are all right. You know, that's fine. It's just all in your mind. The idea that services for African Americans were comparable to those for whites was ridiculous on its face. In the decades of Jim Crow that followed, there was no black-only train car with mahogany walls and brass lamps, no black-only theater, seat except in the balcony, and no gleaming black-only public school with an equal budget to the white one. Homer Plessy faded from the national landscape, but he continued to lead in his working class black community, according to Medley. He died in 1925 with the conviction still on his record. The separate but equal doctrine stood until the U.S. Supreme Court's 1954 Brown versus Board of Education U.S. Supreme Court decision. But that isn't the whole story. Keith Plessy said on Friday, and he quoted the determined statement the Citizens Committee released after the 1896 decision. Quote, we as freemen still believe that we were right and our cause is sacred. We as freemen still believe that we were right and our cause is sacred, end quote. Quote, it started an explosion of activism activism, Phoebe Ferguson, said, calling New Orleans the cradle of the civil rights movement. The cradle of the civil rights movement. Plessy and Ferguson were hopeful that Governor Edwards would approve the pardon, and that, quote, this could be something for him to hang his hat on. This could be something for him to hang his hat on. After Medley introduced them in 2004, Plessy and Ferguson formed the Plessy and Ferguson Foundation. Together, they have worked to have 5 historical markers honoring Homer Plessy added to the New Orleans landscape. Okay, read the rest of this article here from this is from the Washington Post. We'll talk about this some more later this week. Louisiana board votes to pardon Homer Plessy, Plessy versus Ferguson. This is from November 12, 2021. All right. And this is, once again, a major history lesson. And we see how history shapes law, how law shapes history, etc. Okay, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show, and also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. We're here 6 days a week. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting. We're here 6 days a week. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, etc. All right. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN Show, SHOW. As when you go to it, it shows my picture, and it's and our official Cash App tag is $ the AHN Show, SHOW, and it'll say Michael. These other ones are fake African History Network Cash App accounts. I didn't set those up. There have been people stealing money from us. All right. We have to get out of here. Remember, the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow.